Hey, good evening everyone, and welcome. Thanks for staying behind. So here we are, first of our series of our Spring 2020 series. And this season we're going to look at the new curriculum that's being prepared for our schools, our primary schools and secondary schools, prepared largely by a couple of people from our own parish. Colin McLeod and Anne Kennedy's also had a great deal to do with it. But today I just want to look at how the new curriculum has been developed and maybe reflect on how the way it's been developed can also shape us as a parish and as a faith community. So if we think that this is what the children are getting, how can we reflect on what we're getting? So first of all, I'm going old-fashioned. So in the new curriculum there's going to be 4 vertical themes. The theme of God. So throughout the child's schooling they're going to be reflecting and learning about our Christian understanding of who God is. The good news, the second. Now the good news covers the scriptures and tradition. So how we read the scriptures, how we make sense of the scriptures, and how the church's tradition also continues to express the teaching and mission of Jesus. The third strand is our story, in a way reflecting on how we in our own lives, the experiences we have, the experiences those we know have, how all of that is part of our faith and how our faith is caught up in that. And then the final one, the idea of being church. What does it mean for us to be church? Not just what the church is, but how are we as the people of God church? I'm reminded a number of years ago I was celebrating Mass, and after the Mass a woman who was a visitor at the parish, she was waiting to talk to me after the Mass, and I could tell she wasn't waiting to give me a compliment. And when she came up, I can't remember even if she introduced herself, but she asked me, "What years did you go to school?" I thought that was an unusual question, maybe what school I went to, but she says, "What years did you go to school?" And I said, "Oh, well, the 70s and the early 80s. She said, "I thought so. A living lighter, a living lighter." And of course, my generation, the curriculum that we went through was called Living Light, and those that wanted to criticise it emphasised it was very light. And I think this was this woman's way of saying to me that my homily that day was very superficial, very light. But the idea was that, that curriculum, and I don't think it's correct, lacked doctrine, and because it lacked doctrine, that's why the church is where it is today. That's why people no longer practice their faith. Well, anyway, here's the doctrine. This is the doctrine that is embedded in the new curriculum. In a way, this is our I believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. I believe in Jesus Christ. I believe in the Holy Spirit. I believe in the Holy Catholic Church. I believe in the communion of saints. I believe in the forgiveness of sins. This is our doctrine, and the doctrine that's going to be in the curriculum. And I suppose for us to reflect, we are gathered together as a community of people of faith because we have this doctrine, we have this understanding of who God is. We've learnt to appreciate that the scriptures are ways in which God continues to speak to us. But that's not enough. So what the new curriculum does is it has 5 horizontal themes. And these themes are woven through the doctrine themes. So the first theme being the theme of grace. And just reflecting on how what grace is, but how God's grace is at work in you and me and the church, how God's grace is revealed and how God's grace reveals who God is. And then holiness. What does it mean to be holy? So in a sense, these themes are inviting our young people to reflect, hey, where am I in this? So the theme of holiness. The next theme, justice. So we can think about being just, but an idea of justice that's woven, if I can get it, woven into our picture. I wanted to physically do this so as to really push the idea of wovenness. So grace, holiness, justice, wisdom, and finally, prayer. And I wanted these to be woven in also, so that now it's woven, our understanding of God, the scriptures, our tradition, our story, the sense of being church, they're connected. They're not standalone sort of themes that we learn that bit and we're done, and we learn that bit and we're done. They all speak to each other, just as these themes do, that they all are intertwined, that our sense of holiness is connected to our sense of justice and connected to what grace is, what God is doing. But I think I love the woven mat, and I think it resonates a lot with us as maybe people of the Pacific. We have our woven mat at the door of our church here, but just that sense of wovenness first of all. I love the fact that as Christians, as a people of faith, our lives are woven together. You know, I remember visiting a family who grew up on the Cook Islands. They're here in our parish. Not Rarotonga, but one of the Cook Islands. And I remember going onto Google Maps and finding this tiny, tiny little island, thousands of kilometres from Rarotonga, and thinking, here's this person, that was their place where their life unfolded. Here's this boy from just out of Gore, and our lives have become intertwined. Or the people in our parish, you know, the Polish refugee children. All these different stories that weave and woven together as a people of faith. The early Māori, when the missionaries first came, because with this image, they came to this idea of Jesus as te karaiti te kōtuitui, Christ the weaver, a sense of Jesus being the one who weaves our lives together. And of course, understanding that woven into our lives, as our lives are woven together, the life of Jesus is woven through that also. The life of Jesus is part of our story. A few weeks ago, after a funeral, I was met by someone who'd come down from the North Island, and he wanted to pay me a compliment. And it was a genuine compliment from him, but as I heard it, I was thinking, I'm not sure this is really a good compliment. He said to me, that was a great funeral. He says, really good. He says, look, I'm a Catholic. He says, I don't go to Mass or anything now, but I'm a Catholic. He said, but I often find when I go to Catholic funerals that there's so much about God and the afterlife. But, you know, today, you know, it was great. It was a lot about just the person. And I was thinking, I'm not sure I should be congratulated for not mentioning or emphasising God and the afterlife. But it made me think, you know, I was reflecting about it afterwards. I think it's very easy, and maybe this man does it, and maybe it happens, that we take God out And like, God's over here. And we've got our doctrine about God, and we know about the Trinity, and we know the story of Jesus, but it sits over here. And my life and my friends and all of that, they're all over here. That there's a disconnect between our lives and our faith in God. And I would love to think that the sense of wovenness will help our young people see that God is intertwined with their lives, part of their story. Because actually I think I did do a pretty good job at that funeral, because I was wanting to emphasise that the woman, in her generosity, in the way that she lived gratefully and graciously, in the ways that she offered her life to others, to the community, to her family, that Jesus was part of that. It wasn't separate to that. Actually, Jesus was in the offering. Jesus was in the graciousness, the gratefulness. That it was her faith. It was actually about God and about her at the same time. Because God's not here and us here. We're baptised into this mystery. Our lives are intertwined, they are woven. Or similarly, I think sometimes there can be a danger of taking the church out of it. And I think this is a real challenge that we have in today's age, that I can be here and I can read the scriptures and I can have my belief in God, but I don't need this church. So I no longer need the sacraments. I don't need the people that gather. I don't need to look for teaching beyond. And what invariably happens, and that's like the individualistic sort of way of living faith, I start interpreting the scriptures as they make sense to me. But it's the church that interprets the scriptures, you know? And I have my idea of God, but it sort of becomes just my idea because it's disconnected. So that, again, you pull the church bit out, all of this loses its substance and its strength. Or similarly, and I think it's a real concern, you know, a number of people that are being taught and guided by someone who gives a YouTube channel. And all of a sudden you hear of people who are becoming less trusting of the Pope, less trusting of the bishops, and more trusting about someone they've never met, whose life they don't know anything about, who speaks on YouTube. And in a way, that's where actually I'm separating myself from the church. I get annoyed with the bishops, you know. I get annoyed at some things that happen. Of course we do. But once I separate myself from the church, all this, the strength of it, the substance of it, disappears. And it works the other way as well. In the weeks ahead, we're going to have someone come and speak about grace. We're going to have someone speak about holiness. I'm going to speak about justice again. Someone to speak about wisdom, someone to speak about prayer. But if we take any of those themes out of the woven mat, they lose their power as well. I'll use the one I'm going to speak on as an example. We can have an idea of justice without any of this, okay? But it's going to be a different notion of justice, because our understanding of justice is tied up with our understanding of grace, of holiness, of God, is informed by the scriptures, the tradition of the church. We take that out, it's going to lose something of its strength that we have as Christians. Similarly, this theme in the new curriculum, it covers all aspects of justice. The justice that is owed to the earth, the justice that's owed to the poor, the justice that's owed to the weak, the justice that's owed to the unborn, the justice that's owed to the elderly. So all our moral issues, our justice issues are intertwined under this theme of justice. But if we unravel them, if I had a bit more time, I'd have all of those and again weave them into the justice the bit. Because I think there's always a danger that we sometimes think of all of those areas as like policy statements. So that we think that the church has got a policy on abortion, and it's got a policy on justice for workers, and it's got a policy on the environment. Church doesn't have policies. A really important part of our tradition is the interwovenness, the consistent ethic of life, that they're all entwined. You pull one of them out, so if you imagine that, and I pull out my issue of workers' rights, but it's not connected to the others, but that's mine, then it becomes ideology. But this is not ideology, it's faith. So it's the interwovenness of all of these themes. And for me, it gives me a great deal of hope. Like, if those in our schools, in our colleges, can see that big picture, can see all of those themes and see them as necessarily intertwined, interwoven, then I think we can be very hopeful. Of course, there's no curriculum out there that magically sort of converts everyone. But it's good to have a good curriculum that has a good theology, a good understanding of God, a good understanding of justice, a good understanding of what it means to be church. And that's as important for us as a parish, because as a parish community, we model this. You know, we have a really important role to actually model that interwovenness. Your story and my story is part of God's story. And just to finish, I want to just read a little quote from Eugene Peterson when he talks about the scriptures, because it, I think for me, highlights how all of this woven together is what makes it strong. He says, well-meaning people have told us that the Bible is useful, and so we pick it up. We adapt, edit, sift, summarise. We then use whatever seems useful and apply it to the circumstances however they fit. We take charge of the Bible, using it as a toolbox to repair our lives, or as a guidebook for getting what we want, or as an inspirational tract to enliven a dull day. What he's sort of saying is we take the Bible out of that woven mat. But he says the author of the book is writing us into his book. We aren't writing him into ours. We find ourselves in the book as followers of Jesus. And I'd like to think that the good Lord is writing us into the story of God that's woven there together.